Welcome to the new and improved Ark of the Covenant build-up tutorial, part 2 of 2. This video is made as instruction for the full-size set of kit parts available through my website, linked in this video's description. I'm showing you a do-it-yourself chroming technique you can achieve at home using a $16 Harbor Freight air gun and off-the-shelf paints. I chose to use ALUMALUSTER to achieve the golden shine. I'm no professional painter, but I guarantee anyone can do this in their own garage with some basic knowledge and patience. In part 1, we started with the resin kit parts and acrylic panels and assembled the entire trunk. In part 2, we start with trimming and painting the angels. We continue on to the mercy seat, trimming each rail separately, assembling, detailing the corners, and painting with these new techniques. You're going to see the magic you can achieve when you follow these simple steps. We then finish detailing and reveal the completed Ark of the Covenant. Let's get started with these angels. So each angel has a seam line that starts up here on the band of the head, and there's a seam that's inside here. There is a seam that's running down the thighs to the base edge on both sides. So the seam runs up here, it comes along the wing edge at the very bottommost part of this edge, and it comes across. We're going to handle those seam lines with 60 grit paper. I have a 60 grit sanding sponge, and I have a fine sanding sponge and a Dremel. Here at the base, work my way up the thighs and then down the wings. When you're all the way down across to the other side, then you want to work the seam here. These sanding sponges are pretty nice to use because they flex around corners. You can really push them in and get into those hard to reach spaces. Occasionally on these castings you'll have a little pinhole. There's one right here. It's really hard to see. It's very small, but you can probably see it right there. Very easy to fill. We don't have to use any kind of automotive filler for this. This is just a real quick spot to fill in, and I use Abe's Epoxy Sculpt. This is great stuff. This should be on every modeler's bench. So you just mix this putty, one part to one part, and then we're going to push this putty into that little hole, and it'll take what it needs and then smooth it over. For this next level of sanding, we're going to get in here with a rotary tool and define these wing shapes. In this area here, where the wing meets the side of the head, it doesn't hurt to grab a little microfile and just define that just a little bit more. Just kind of bring that edge up to a sharp line to the side of the head. I have a little bit of Bondo mixed up, and I have a little sculpting trowel, just a little mini tool. These are Harbor Freight sculpting tools, and I'm going to take this angel now, and I'm going to examine where that seam line still exists, and it's mostly on these wing tips, so I'm just going to trowel on a small amount of filler. From here on out, you don't want to use any sandpaper that's above 220. 220 and below, because this is a good finish sand. I'm pretty happy with these parts. Now I'm going to wash these guys. Soap and water. It's a little bit of Dawn and some warm water. We want to get any kind of finger oils off of this, any kind of debris that got on here from doing our work. Here we go with painting. Let me show you the equipment I'm using. I've got a very inexpensive touch-up gun. This is from Harbor Freight. You really don't need super expensive touch-up guns for larger areas and for when you're doing big-time wet coats, especially with the 2K clear. I'll be using this larger air gun. Again, Harbor Freight, inexpensive. Here's the paint products I'm using. I've got Speed Coat High Gloss Jet Black. That's going to give me my base. And then to give it an extra thickness and extra gloss, it's U-Pol. This is the level of glossiness you want to achieve. All that hard work is about to pay off. But let me just take a quick walk around these angels just to show you how shiny these are. Now you cannot achieve this with rattle cans. You can't achieve this with an airbrush. You have to use automotive paint. Urethane is what I'm using. My airbrush equipment consists of this compressor, just from Amazon.com, very inexpensive. The airbrush, this is a high volume airbrush, and it's called Go Cheer. Go Cheer. My best result with this ALUMALUSTER is a light coat first and then a wet coat after. Keep that airbrush moving. You don't want any super hot spots. You can already see this start changing. Make sure you're attacking from all angles. I'm going up, down, sideways from this way. Just so you can see how far this goes, coating those two angels completely took a little over an ounce. I'd say maybe about 1.3 ounces, so not very much. I mean, just this much for both the angels. Now it's time to take it to the final step, tinting the chrome gold. What I'm using is the standard U-Pol 4:1 2K clear, and I'm tinting it with Candy Concentrate by SEM. So it's just a splash. And you can mix more to get a richer color. And we apply this in wet coats, but not too wet to cause drips. So we are going to be starting with putting the Mercy seat together, tacking the corners, getting everything permanently engaged, and we're going to build up and out and down from there. So let's get started. Here are the 4 rails. You've got your 2 short, your 2 long. Right now, just temporarily, I've got these propped up on bricks, so I can kind of get an idea for what's going on. And the way these ship is there's a little bit of flashing left over on each edge. So you'll need to take it down. The reason I leave a little bit of that flashing is so that you can get an idea. I can't do this with one hand, but you get an idea by using a corner edge where you're going, where you're starting, and where you need to go. So I need a nice 90 corner on this, and I am going to go ahead and not worry so much about how it joins here. Mostly I want a nice flush join. Keep in mind when you're trimming, especially on a belt sander, because it takes away material very quickly, that you're looking to get rid of flash. But more importantly, even if you're not getting rid of all of the flash, you're looking for a nice 90-degree edge. The material comes off really quickly, so work slow on that sander. Just going to very slowly creep up on that 90-degree join. What you saw me doing there just now is I'm holding this with both hands and standing kind of far back, and I'm making sure that I'm straight up and down, because I don't want to grind this edge too much this way or too much that way. I kind of want it to be nice and straight. So that is looking pretty good to me. Don't worry if it's not perfect here and if it's not exactly edge to edge here. This is all covered up later with these corner leaves. What I'm doing to join these corners is I'm using a little cyanoacrylic glue. This is extra thick. This is the brand I use. And I'll be using a disposable brush to dip it in here, drag it across the interior edges, I think of just one side. Then I'm using the spray kicker. This is the stuff that I learned is great spray kicker. Learned this from Adam Savage. Then I'm going to hit this down, and then with 2 hands, very carefully join these up, wait for it to tack, and then I'll go on the inside with the same technique. Okay, remember, I'm not worried about how pretty that seam line is. It's all covered up in the end. What I'm worried about and taking great care to establish is 90 degrees. I had to make some adjustments as I was putting this to 90 degrees, so I've got a little bit of a gap, but I only need to fill that little spot because that all gets covered up. I found this ply at Home Depot. It's the perfect height to support the top of the Mercy seat, and I'll be countersinking some screws. The top, whether you're doing this in mirrored acrylic or regular wood or plastic, is 23 by 40. And what you're left with is a little bit of a lip, which will be necessary to lay down your gallery rails and your top row of leaves. And let me show you what that looks like. Here's your top. For me, in this tutorial, I will be using a piece of mirrored acrylic instead of this piece of masonite. And what happens is your top leaves will butt up against it. You can adjust this as necessary to allow an even spacing. A little bit of a lip here between the gallery rails, and then they butt right up against the top row of leaves. Absolutely beautiful. The 8 corner leaves will each need trimming. I'm doing this with a belt sander and a bandsaw. I have these leaves now shaved pretty thin, and what I'm going to do is Dremel off this little bit here, this little last leaf area, so that this sits a little more flat to that corner. Alright, let's attach these corner leaves. I have a nice flush surface here. I'll be able to make a nice little join there. I'm using Magic Sculpt. You can use Epoxy Sculpt, same stuff. Magic Sculpt to me is a little easier to use. It's a little more pliable. It doesn't dry out as fast. It's kind of expensive stuff, but it's completely worth the price. The easiest way I found to do this is to put a big clump here in the middle that you'll press down in there really flat, and then I make a tube. Kind of bend that tube around. And then press everything on. Really hard. A wooden sculpting tool will help you trim it out, and you let this dry for 3 or 4 hours. We're going to clean up some of these edges with a little bit of glazing putty and then a little bit of sanding. This depends on just how perfect you want this to be. The next thing we're doing is we're shaving with the belt sander about 1/8 inch off the bottom of the top row of leaves. And we need to trim them so that they fit edge to edge properly. You trim it right at the spine. The gallery rails, again, are shaved very simply with the belt sander. You have 4 equal lengths of gallery rails. So your short ends will be trimmed very carefully from this edge to this edge. Now, using your leftover rail from trimming the long piece for the short side, you want to trim one little figure and extend that long rail by 1 figure. I'm going to blend these edges again with a little glazing putty and sanding just to make that seam line completely disappear. So I would make sure that I identify these with a little groove on the bottom of these rails, just to know that when you do final assembly, you're not guessing which edge goes to which edge. And here we are. Everything is ready for final assembly. Everything is trimmed. I'm quite pleased with how this ARK is looking. Now, at this stage, you can do the final assembly on the gallery rails and paint everything, or send it in for electroplating or vacuum metallizing or cosmochroming. But we are taking a different route with this. We're doing the poor man's version of the shine. But here you are, finished Mercy seat, ready for the next final stages. Before I paint the Mercy seat, I'm going to hit over the corners with some primer just to make sure everything is looking nice and clean. To keep the Mercy seat up off the bench, nice and elevated so I can get to all the under angles, I built this little support stand just out of 2x4s and ply. Looking pretty shiny. Again, you're not going to achieve this using standard paints. You're going to want to use 2K automotive paint to do this. We're going to give this 2K top coat, gloss coat about a day to dry. Then we'll hit it with the mid coat of ALUMALUSTER. Here we are, the next day. This ALUMALUSTER has had a day to dry, and it is blinding. Here it is with the mirrored acrylic panel on top. And finally, with everything on top. Absolutely amazing. Done with the ALUMALUSTER and one acrylic panel. It's time to tint this all gold with 2K clear and the gold candy coat. It all turned out beautifully. Look at this rich, rich, shiny gold. Here's the underside of the lid. Equally amazing. So it's time to put things together. Here is the lid, that piece of mirrored acrylic that's also been tinted gold, and the top row of leaves and gallery rails. Let's put all these together. You may end up with a little bit of a separation where the gallery rail corners meet, and I'm just going to fine-tune those with a little bit of epoxy sculpt. I showed you this stuff earlier. It's really great for doing little fixes. And I'm just going to use my fingers. I might get a little sculpting tool to contour this. A little bit of moisture will help smooth this out. And then we're just going to finish these corners. And we can either paint this gold or use some gold foil. And this will blend right in. You'll never notice a difference. Okay, here it is, guys. The finished ARK. Just on cue, too. The sun just came out. It's been really rainy the last couple weeks, but here is the sun. Shows off all this brilliant mirrored finish. Look at the reflections of the poles and the fabric and the body. Just absolutely overwhelming. Brilliant. Isn't this absolutely stunning? Thanks for joining me on that journey. I'm so excited to share this technique with you. I've shown you a method of building up this beautiful life-size ARK using inexpensive air guns and all off-the-shelf paints without the need for outsourcing the gold chroming steps. I think the result speaks for itself. Be sure to like and subscribe to see future content, and check the links in the video description to learn more about how this was made. As always, thanks for watching.